Did you see that so-called national championship game on Monday night? Yes, we will discuss. And more Buckeye decisions, of course, for the NFL draft, looking across that front wall on the offensive side right here at Buckeyes Live, number 195, Tony Gritterman from the top, Buckeye Huddle and his podcast, Buckeye Weekly. And just in time, why don't we throw in Mr. Kevin Noon, also from Buckeye Huddle, and the Big Mean Podcast, Steve Hellwagon, merely from Bucknuts and 247 Sports. There he is. Guys, how we doing today?
Great.
Good.
Well. All right. Well, we looked at 4 offensive linemen all making decisions. Some made, some still yet to be made. Steve, take us through the front line that did such a great job for most of the season and certainly protecting C.J. Stroud against that Georgia defense.
Well, we know Donovan Jackson, sophomore, will be back for his 3rd year at guard. That's the easy one. The expected, Paris Johnson, first-round NFL draft choice most likely. CBS had him in the teens, I think, in one of their mock drafts. Pretty obvious. He's got his degree in hand as well in 3 years at Ohio State. So he's gone and headed to the NFL. That came out earlier this week. The unexpected, Luke Whippler, had talked before the game, the center, about if he played well against Jalen Carter, then he'd probably contemplate leaving for the NFL. He must have got a good draft grade because yesterday he made the announcement that he is leaving for the NFL. It was late last night, about 9:30 maybe, he made that public. So congratulations to him and best of luck. I can't imagine he's going to go much above the 3rd round. So, maybe 2nd round. I don't know. But, good for him. He was a 2-year starter for Ohio State and did an outstanding job. And then heard today that Matthew Jones, who started at guard for the Buckeyes this past year, he had contemplated leaving and even was recognized at the senior day. But he will return. I've lost track if this will be a 5th or a 6th year for him, but he's using his super senior year, 6th year for him. Super senior year is what he will be using next year to come back. And my guess that this was all in the works from the moment that Luke Whippler was leaving, that Matthew Jones would come back, and was probably convinced by Ryan Day and Justin Fry that to improve his marketability, he would get to start, I would assume, next year in 2023 at center, because he had repped at center previously. And so it makes perfect sense for him to come back. And now he's able to tell the NFL in a year, I can play any of the 3 interior positions. So, and that should improve his marketability. I can't imagine he would have gone up above the 4th round this year. And maybe he works his way up into a 2nd or 3rd round pick by becoming a center. So those ones we know. The only one left out there is DeJuan Jones, the right tackle. Fully expected he's going to turn pro as part of this as well. He'd have to come back for a 5th year, I believe. And he was also snuck in one of the CBS mocks at like number 31 in the 1st round. He's a mountain of a guy. Whatever he's listed at, it's probably not enough, 6'7" and 350 or whatever he is. So he's a big guy. And, big question for him is, can he handle agility-wise what those speed rushers are going to give him off the edge in the NFL? I mean, I just think that for him, it's going to be a tough go against a guy like a Nick Bosa, who has got such great get-off that he's going to have a time with that. But I'm going to turn it over to you guys. I got to step out just for 1 second, but I'll listen to what everyone else has to say about this.
Well, fortunately for DeJuan Jones, struggling against Nick Bosa is not the measure of good or bad as an offensive lineman, because everybody's going to struggle against him. But, he was a guy that basically admitted he was done after the loss to Michigan, because when we talked to them, when Ohio State got announced as a playoff participant, we talked to the players, and he thought his career was done at that point. I wonder if they've been trying to make a play that DeJuan come back and be a left tackle and watch your stock rise even more. But it's difficult to get guys to come back. And with Matt Jones, I think that's significant because it's a lot easier to find a guard than it is a center. And I think you just plug him in a center. And that's basically getting a guy out of the portal or something like that to keep Matt Jones for a 6th year. That's a significant thing. And when Buckeye fans are like, why aren't they getting anybody? Why aren't they adding anybody? This is that. This is getting a guy who wasn't supposed to be back to come back. So this is getting somebody that you weren't expecting to have next year necessarily. And if you can have him healthy all year long, that's even better. This is a guy who was an honorable mention All Big Ten player last year as I think he started like 4 games. It was a part-time player. 2nd team All Big Ten this year. So that is it's a significant return. And I'm not expecting DeJuan Jones back, so they're going to have to find 2 new tackles. And at this point, I don't know where Kevin's thinking, but I'm thinking Donovan Jackson is probably your left tackle at this point.
Yeah, and the truth of the matter is that I like Donovan Jackson much more at guard than I do at tackle. So whether or not it's a case of finally having some success in a search for an offensive lineman in the portal, it's been a minute since they've been able to get one, or whatever, I don't know. I mean, Matt Jones coming back is huge in terms of what's going on there, because bringing in a new quarterback, you want to sit there and have the center battle settled. If you're going to have a new center, you want to make sure that they have all offseason to work together. And since there's not a quarterback settled, at least Matt Jones knows that he can work with both Kyle McCord and Devin Brown. So then you've got guys like Josh Fryer, Enoch Vamahi, who certainly are capable of playing guard. I think we've seen a little Enoch on the outside during certain type of drills and things, but it's taken an offensive line that was really a strength for Ohio State and put it into a lot of questions because we don't know what it's going to look like. I think that, as Steve had mentioned, obviously with Paris Johnson leaving, we would all be surprised if DeJuan Jones comes back. We knew they were going to need 2 new tackles, but we kind of figured, okay, we know what the interior line is going to look like with Jones, and if he comes back, which he is, with Jackson, who has to come back. He's not ready to go. And then we're thinking that Luke Whippler was going to be in the middle. So now you take another body out of the mix. Ohio State is certainly deep with guards at this point, thin at tackle. I'm just not sure. I'm not ready to sit there and say all hope is lost, 9-3 next season, calling it right now. But it went from something that seemed to be a little bit more sure to something that's a little bit more up in the air. And it's really highlighting some of the misses down the end of the Greg Sturara tenure at Ohio State in terms of Ohio State missing on a lot of tackles.
It could be 5 guards on the offensive line next year. We've seen the 4 tackles and 1 center offensive line. It could be 5 guards basically next year for the Buckeyes. And you've got to put your most mobile guards outside and then figure the rest of the guys out inside.
Yeah, I think you're looking at Zen Michalski and Josh Fryer as guys that would probably fit in there. Fryer is a guy who played quite a bit. People will notice that he would go in as number 41, which I've joked somebody on the staff must have been a big Tom Seaver fan or something, because when they put the offensive lineman jersey, eligible receiver offensive lineman jersey on somebody the last couple of years, it was Donovan Jackson. Last year was number 41, and then this year it was Josh Fryer was number 41. So that number must be stuck in somebody's heart as the visiting lineman number. But at any rate, that experience is huge. Plus, Josh Fryer and Enoch Vamahi split time at guard against Michigan when Matthew Jones was not able to play due to injury. Jones did come back and played against Georgia, obviously. So to me, I think Fryer is a strong candidate to fill one of those tackle spots, and Michalski perhaps as well. But I did hear, the thought about Donovan Jackson also sliding out. To me, I don't know if he's got the reach or the height, that you want in a tackle. It seems like he's got a perfect guard body, to be honest with you. But maybe for his marketability in his contract year going to the NFL, he can show them I can play 4 of the 5 spots if he can master the tackle position as well, which would be huge for his marketability. So there you go.
All right, folks, appreciate you being here at Buckeyes Live. We join you every Wednesday, typically at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So get on back next week, bring a friend or two or 50, and bring those comments and questions as we make it on through the off season. This group certainly, if nothing else, acquitted itself those last two games in pass protection. Ohio State's calling card as CJ Stroud and those receivers making it happen downfield, and they allowed for long pass routes. They allowed for multiple pass routes, and pretty much anything Ohio State wanted to do in the passing game was there and available to Ryan Day.
And that's going to be the focus moving forward. And how much do you have to change that? Do you go to more quick passing to protect your offensive line? But you've got so many weapons offensively, and you want to use them all over the place. So Justin Fry's going to have his work cut out for him, getting that kind of pass protection that allows that deep stuff to work. But they're going to be starting 5 4-star guys pretty much at some point. Josh Fryer being maybe a high 3-star at right tackle, and he's played a lot, and they're comfortable with him. So it's not like there's nobody. But there's the lack of proven players. And Zen Mahalski, redshirt freshman this year, is kind of a late blooming type of guy that they're hoping can become something. And maybe next year that happens. I think he'll be in the 2 deep. And if I think they want him to win the job, but it's a matter of can he. And I think that this spring is going to be incredibly interesting to watch, however much of it we get to watch.
Yeah, exactly. I was joking in one of my text threads. I have multiple that due to the lack of offensive tackles, that we will not have a spring game. We will just have 3 hours of knocker ball instead, and there will be much rejoicing as they have to go back to the lab and kind of retool this line and figure out what's going on.
Here's our band.
Yes, Ohio State certainly has some guys in terms of star talent, but certainly has some guys with the portal deadline approaching, for the January portal entry deadline approaching, that have been in the program for 3 years and haven't cracked the 2 deep. And, I'm a little surprised we haven't seen more names appear. And I don't speak names into existence. That's, not necessarily the direction I want to go, but the misses that Ohio State has had on the offensive line have been very obvious there. And Ohio State has been fortunate for the last couple of years, to be able and get guys like Paris Johnson Jr., somebody who came right in and played at a high level pretty much from the word go. Donovan Jackson kind of went through a little bit of his growing pains, but is solidified into his position. Dwan Jones was somebody who was kind of viewed as a late add in his recruiting class, and developed into a player that's going to get an opportunity to play on Sundays. So Ohio State needs certainly to find that next guy, whether it is a Zim Mikulski, whether, I'll throw a name of somebody who's going to be a second-year player. What does Tegra Shabola look like here in year 2? Is he somebody that starts to put it all together? There's certainly going to need – somebody's going to have to step up. I still think Ohio State is going to search the portal with great gusto and great emphasis to try and find themselves an offensive tackle, but you can't go out and just get somebody and say, here, the devil we don't know beats the devil we do know. You need to make sure that he's somebody that's better than what you have on your roster. And as guys like Walter Rouse is supposed to announce his commitment to Stanford offensive tackle. He's not visited Ohio State in terms of as a transfer target. So that's an issue. The Washington State offensive tackle ends up transferring to USC, but he's a California kid. So that's not a huge surprise that he decided to stay out west after starting his career at Wazoo. But they need to do something here, because at this point, the offensive line has to be able to protect a first-year starting quarterback.
One last thing. Sure. I was just going to say, losing 2 third-year offensive linemen, I think you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, they've lost 2 prior in like the last 25 years. Orlando Pace and Michael Jordan are the only two that I can think of off the top of my head in terms of third-year offensive linemen leaving for the NFL. And to lose two from the same class, two at the same time, 2 in 1 year, I don't think that's something they planned on. And I don't think you can ever really plan on losing a third-year center. That's just it's just a rarity. And so now you're left scrambling a little bit. But it is time for guys to start emerging. There's going to be plenty of opportunities in the spring for reps. And I do wonder how many guys are waiting until after spring to find out where they are in that depth chart before they leave. I think maybe that's what they're going to be doing. And there are going to be some guys that realize, if they don't realize it now, they're going to realize it in the spring, that with all of these jobs open and you're not getting much of a look, that you're not going to play at Ohio State.
Yeah, there's a handful of guys. The moving sidewalk is ending. Please look down. I mean, Jacob James, is penciled in as the backup center. Is he really the next man up, or are they going to do as I assume, and it'll be Matthew Jones just to improve his marketability? Maybe they think they've got a better offensive line with Jacob James at center and Matthew Jones staying at guard. Whether that turns out to be the case or not, they've got 3 or 4 other guys who didn't see the light of day, who are in their second or third year on the scholarship role on the offensive line at Ohio State, and it's time. Either you're in the 2 deep after spring football or you're not. And if you're not, pick up your stuff and move on, because you're not going to play at Ohio State. So sad reality of the situation. There could be some of those guys that are looking to get through spring semester and maybe complete a degree and then move on. Is entirely possible that some of those guys that are in their second, third year, whatever it is, are in a position to graduate, and then they will indeed move on. So, the handwriting's on the wall. If you haven't played to this point, you're finishing your third year, you're really not in the plans unless you make some kind of a major step this spring. And Justin Fry wasn't the guy who recruited you either. So, transfer portal and incoming freshmen and his sophomores, he had a pretty good sophomore group, and a pretty good freshman group coming in. Are they going to push some of those older guys out?
One more thought too. It's a lot harder now to just carry some players at the end of your 85, at 82, 83, 84, who really just enjoy being around the guys. And okay, well, I just got dealt a rough hand, and I guess I'm not really going to get to play much or whatever, but I just want to stick around. That's a lot more difficult now with the constant churn of the portal and just with the division in terms of the haves and the have-nots. You just really can't carry guys like that at this point. And while it's not a case of guys, officially being shown the door, I think there's a lot of things like, all right, I want you to run some gassers towards that big rectangular object right there and pick up your stuff on the way out. You need to maybe push some guys out of the nest, because again, while you're not necessarily counting on 80, 81, 82 on your 85-man scholarship chart to be immediate impact players, you also can't weigh it down with guys who are just along for the ride because they enjoy the chow.
That's when having Luke Fickell at Cincinnati played such huge dividends, because either Urban or Ryan Day would pick up the bat phone and say to the AAA affiliate down in Cincinnati, I got a couple offensive linemen for you. I got Blue Smith for you. I got, whoever. Here you go. So he's not there anymore. And in fact, they promoted the fact that Luke Fickell will be back in Columbus in February. The first few days of February every year, it's a rite of passage that the Ohio High School Football Coaches Association, the day after the old signing day, that Thursday and Friday and Saturday, they have their coaches clinic at the Hilton Hotel in Easton. Ryan Day will speak on the Friday night. Luke Fickell will be back from Wisconsin to speak, and certainly his motto will be, hey, if Ohio State won't take your guys, we certainly will. And here's the thing. It came up in the chat that I did last night. Lakewood St. Edward has a 2024 offensive lineman by the name, I think it's Ben Roebuck, who's like 6'7", 322-pound offensive tackle, and everybody under the sun has offered him, with the notable exception of The Ohio State University. I even did a story on him when he was at the Ohio State camp and had worked directly with Justin Fry on the field on one of those 85 to 100-degree days that we always sit through every year there in June at the football camp. And people are like, why, if they need offensive tackles, and this guy's ranked like 150, 160 nationally in the composite, probably top 20 offensive tackle in the country, something like that. Why isn't Ohio State offering him yet? So, it kind of does make you wonder, what's going on. But, I can't speak for Justin Fry other than to say, if he's worked with somebody directly and he hasn't offered him a scholarship, maybe that should tell you everything you need to know. But they could go out and offer this kid tomorrow, for all I know. So,
well, I mean, not to belabor the point, but I'll say that, give the same thing that I've said for years. In-state guy, you better be damn sure that's a kid you want. Like with St. Ed's, always has kids. You sit there, you give Ben Roebuck the runaround. You offer him, he tries to commit. You go, oh, well, it was an offer, not an offer. Let's just wait. Let's see you in camp and then see how much success you have at St. Ed's. I would rather be transparent and be like, well, we're still evaluating at this point. I think that St. Ed's, the coaching staff and the supporters and everybody around that program would respect that more than you being a little shady at that point. It's a lot easier for an out-of-state school to be able to go in and throw an offer and then kind of wait and see. But I agree. I think Roebuck is a pretty good player. I am kind of curious where the disconnect is, why Ohio State isn't like, all right, we will take this kid on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, whatever day he wants to commit, we'll take him. And to add salt to the wounds, probably going to Michigan. So there you go.
Well, one of the big reasons, of course, this transition from 22 to 23 is so key is, of course, C.J. Stroud moving on to the NFL. But, the offensive line in tandem with C.J. Stroud, as you guys just outlined, there's more uncertainty going forward than there's been in quite a long time. And put that together with a new starting quarterback, and most likely, unless they do something outside in the transfer portal, it's going to be an inexperienced starting quarterback. I don't know. I got to wonder to a certain extent about all these early number 2 and number 3 ranked projections preseason going into 23 on these way too earlys all over the place. I don't know if that's just trust in the roster, the recruiting, the process, the coaching, all of that, because or just that if you look around, everybody's losing their starting quarterback for the most part, except for Michigan. But most of the main players across the country losing their starting quarterbacks unless they're in the Pac-12, because most of those guys are all coming back to put Ohio State in this lofty number 2 or 3 position preseason.
2 words. Marvin. There's 3, so
4,
5. That's what it is. That guy is so good that it's almost foolproof. I mean, he's amazing. Agbuka doesn't. He's Robin. Harrison is Batman, but Agbuka is definitely Robin, if not Robin plus. He's or Batman 2. He's right there with him. So that's the best tandem of wide receivers anybody in the country could have. So, I don't know if is the guy from Tennessee going pro, I presume. So yeah. So he's going to be the Biletnikoff Award winner unless he somehow has a bad hamstring. So is it too soon? Should I have not said that? But
what you did, Steve.
Ohio State reloads so well, and we sat there 2 years ago. Is it McCord? Is it Stroud? And then Stroud is a 2-year Heisman finalist and, gets the ticket to New York and so on and so forth. But, yeah, I mean, we've been talking internally at Buckeye Huddle about maybe trying to do our own preseason top 25. And I've started kind of looking at some teams, and A lot of teams have a lot of holes right now, and is a team that was 7-5 that is bringing 80% of its roster back. Is that better than a team that was 11-2, played the eventual national champions to within a point, and that might be bringing back less of a percentage? I mean, it's a lot of speculation. You don't know, but it certainly makes for interesting conversation, and I'm here for that because there certainly are topics around the team that I'm kind of sick and tired of talking about. You're on mute, Mark. Still on mute.
There it is. Mute's better than coughing, but I got to remember to take it off. There we go. Okay. So yes, a way too early top 25. I'll be working on myself here at some point. Appreciate.
Shouldn't you have that done the day after the national championship game, though? Isn't it the time to drop it?
Yeah, that's the way things are done these days. Yeah, it's even too late now for a way too early top 25. It's January 15th. Wow.
Speaking of that, everybody had Georgia and Alabama up there, and it was I thought Saban was really good on the broadcast leading up to the game in halftime. And man, I am one of Desmond Howard's biggest detractors, but he gave Ohio State props for the way that they played against Georgia. So the one time in his life that he's had to give Ohio State some grudging respect, and I give him credit for that. So,
but they lost, so it was easy.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's easy to praise them when they lose. Yeah, because they lost the game. So, but yeah, I mean, people are like, there were 8 AP poll voters that put Ohio State, I think, ahead of Michigan, which is interesting. None of them were from the state of Ohio. Even our friend Dave Briggs from Toledo had Ohio State 4th. And as you look at it, as my dogs freak out, my dogs are freaking out, and no one's here to work with them. So, but of the 4 teams at the top, Georgia was 2-0 against those teams. TCU was 1-1 with a win over Michigan. Michigan was 1-1 with a win over Ohio State, and Ohio State was 0-2. So to me, it kind of that's the hierarchy it should be. But then TCU at number 2 loses by 55 points. How can that even be a thing?
And moves up from 3 to 2.
Yeah, I don't know.
And that team that lost by 5 billion points beat Michigan. So do you sit there and do you look at this in a situation of saying, okay, the whole season matters, but now we're in a 4-team tournament, and they call this a 4-team tournament frequently. So is there some sort of soft dividing line between this 4-team tournament and the rest of the regular season in terms of making these decisions? And Ohio State certainly played the second best football out of anybody. Granted, you can sit there and say, well, they also allowed a couple of 14-point leads to get away from them, but they also lost their best offensive threat in terms of a playmaker not distributing the football in Marvin Harrison Jr. So you can look at it from this way and saying, okay, Ohio State played Georgia within a point. TCU played them within 58 points. And Michigan lost to TCU by 5 points, 6 points. And make an argument there. I'm more apt to sit there and say, if you're not first, who cares? I mean, you're not, it doesn't really matter. There's not a you're on mute. There's not a trophy. There's not a trophy for second place, third place, fourth place. There's not a medal stand. You're not spraying champagne on each other, so it's not a big deal with any of that. But I think that Ohio State had just as much of an argument as anybody to be second based on if you believe there is a soft dividing line between the postseason and the regular season.
I think TCU's the biggest wild card in the evaluation for exactly what you just said, Kevin, and more, because either you hold up with, okay, they made it to the national championship game, therefore we're just going to adhere to this rigid. They made the national championship game, and they also beat Michigan. Therefore, they're number 2. Therefore, Michigan's got to be behind them. Therefore, Ohio State's got to be behind Michigan because they lost to them. Or if you're going to cascade them down, then the free fall starts, because you can start with a second loss now. And especially in that fashion, you can start moving them behind all sorts of teams down the list. They could wind up 7th. And there's some relevance to that, some validity to that.
Well, and 2 AP voters had Ohio State 6th behind Tennessee and Alabama.
Were they from the South?
I think one was from Alabama. I think the other one was like from Vegas or something. I don't know. I College Poll Tracker is a fantastic site to use during the season to see how everybody votes and to remember which newspapers to cancel. I'm sorry. Subscribe local journalism. Sign up for your local paper. But rewarding Tennessee for its awesome win over Clemson and rewarding Alabama for its awesome win over, I don't even remember who they played in the Sugar Bowl, to be quite honest. And that's not comedy. That's truth. I don't remember who they played because that game meant so little to me. I guess it was K-State now that I think about it. It shows the wide swath there that you have. I mean, at least in the coaches poll, you know what you're going to get. The national champion is 1 and the national runner-up is 2. It is mandated to finish that way. That is part of the rules. You're not going to have any arguments there. So, I don't know. I just think TCU moving up from 3 to 2 was kind of comical.
Yeah, speaking of which, wow. So I got to think, even the greatest disrespecter of TCU football out there didn't forecast a 58-point loss, didn't forecast the slaughtering that we saw that was epic and historical. And, to try to summarize that game, there was no need for it. I came on here after the game. Nobody wanted to talk about that game. They were talking about Georgia's coronation, or what if Ohio State or 2023, because, we went from one extreme where 2 semifinal games were so compelling, so important, every tick of the clock important, every game management decision, time management, that it had to be dissected to the hilt, to why even talk about this game? There was nothing consequential, no coaching decision. Kirby Smart could have thrown his playbook up in the air and, just Todd Monken could have just, pointed at random plays and they would have worked. And it was just, that did not seem very good for the sport, Tony.
Well, and they could have avoided this by making TCU and Georgia a semifinal match on New Year's Eve, as it should have been. You can't look at Georgia's 2 games and think that they got that this was done correctly. To see them pushed to the wire and have to rely on a missed field goal to win in the semifinals, and then to take on a much lesser opponent in the national championship game, when Georgia, being the number 1 seed, was supposed to take on the much lesser opponent in the first round in the semifinals, and they didn't. And you could have had Ohio State and Michigan in the semifinals, which would have done huge ratings. And Georgia and TCU, doesn't matter what that does because it's a semifinal, and then you'd guarantee yourself huge ratings in the national championship game. The committee wanted to, I don't know why they decided what they did, other than maybe they didn't want to have Ohio State, Michigan in the semis. But they say they don't look at conferences. So what are you looking at? You're looking at TCU making it to the Big 12 championship game and giving them the edge over Ohio State, I guess. Well, were you right? I don't think you were. Now, TCU did beat Michigan, but what did they do that next week? And so, yeah, I think the committee didn't do Georgia any favors. The committee didn't do the playoffs any favors with the seeding that they did, even though they had 2 tremendous semifinals. But you're going to be remembered for the national championship game.
I'm going to this restaurant. They got kick-ass appetizers, but their main course sucks. I mean, I'm probably not going back there. Probably not going back there. So they blew it. They let America down with their. I mean, I can understand their logic at the time, but it's apparent that they hated ratings because put that Georgia TCU game in the 4 o'clock slot, put Ohio State Michigan in the 8 o'clock slot, and
God,
then
it would have done 30 million viewers.
and then profit
Jesus.
when the national championship game got the ratings of a repeat of This Is Us. I mean, it was it was ridiculous.
Did it come out? What did it get? 17, 18 million?
The tweet I saw boasted how great the playoffs were in general.
Didn't mention it.
That's how bad the championship game was that they had to keep referring to the semifinal games to prop the numbers up.
Did it even get 20? Did it even get 20, I wonder?
I thought it was 17.
17.
17. Wow. Well, by 9 o'clock or 9:15, 9:30, you could turn it off and go to bed. I mean, there was no reason to continue. If you weren't a Georgia fan, there was no reason to continue watching. It's 38-7 at halftime or whatever it was. I mean, it's over. And what I liked is they got it. It was down, done, over in a spiffy 2 hours and 56 minutes. I mean, it was in, out, done. The guy in the red hat's like, "Nah, we ain't taking this break. Keep it going."
Advertisers were pulling out midstream. No, I don't want to be associated with this
guy in the red
debacle.
hat in his stupid sign that says 4 minutes, 4-minute break, there at the stadium. God, what a mess.
Yeah, 16.6 million for the main broadcast, 400,000 for all the other ones thrown together, the auxiliary broadcasts.
What a disaster.
The McAfee broadcast only got like 400,000.
That's
423 apparently.
At least they made him wear a suit like a big boy.
Well, and here's the thing: it's Monday night too. This thing needs to be played at like 6 p.m. on a Saturday night or 7 p.m. on a. I know it's the NFL and the NFL this, the NFL that, but man, it just I don't know. But of course, if you do that,
it was played on a Sunday. I mean, I don't understand. I mean, it's a school night. People are gonna. I don't get all up in arms about that one as much. I understand that you have to start it later because of West Coast, especially with the game being in LA. So you're dealing with time zones and everything else. But I understand why they did it for Monday because they're trying to sit there and incorporate the weekend through it, so these student athletes are not missing as much school time. Even when the CFP was put together, I don't think we had as much widespread prevalence of online classes.
Yeah,
there's an interesting point here about the Ant-Man trailer. I think the thing that I saw, it was supposed to debut at like 7:30, and they just kept pushing it back so that people would stay tuned to the game as it got uglier and uglier. And I think it might have, I don't know if it was like the end of the third quarter or it was at the start of the third quarter thereabouts where they finally like, okay, we're going to give you the Ant-Man trailer. And then I'm guessing the ratings after that just completely bottomed out.
People on Twitter were like, "Show the damn Ant-Man trailer now, so I can go to bed."
What's an Ant-Man? I don't even know.
The only suspense on this thing was whether it was going to go over 61 or 62 or whatever, and it did take a while to get there, but eventually it did. And man, I was adamant. Dave Biddle from our site and myself were doing a show Monday morning. And I spoke for 3 minutes about why I thought TCU would beat the 13. And Dave matter-of-factly said 2 sentences. Nope, Georgia blows them out. And didn't really even have a good reason for it. Just, Georgia wears caps and sleeves at this level where TCU is, new money or whatever. And, sorry about your damn luck. But, yeah, it was a long day. And, the Big 12 – it's kind of back to the drawing board. I mean, no Texas, no Oklahoma, and this is the best you've got, on the big stage. So I don't know.
I read that allegedly, and I didn't hear the interview or whatever, but that Max Duggan said that they were intimidated by the Georgia fans barking, like coming out onto the stadium. I mean, if that's the case, Ohio State should have cashed in the Money in the Bank briefcase and just run in there and play them all over again, because
that's Ohio State's music.
If you're that scared of fans going,
as they're playing fight the team.
Hell, the Cleveland Browns should be unfreaking defeated then if that's the case with the dog pound. If it makes you nervous.
There's a school of thought. Some people on Twitter have kind of said this is what you're going to get with a 12-team playoff, with a 5 playing a 12. The disparity in the teams at the top against the teams in the upper middle class, is can be pretty bad. I mean, so I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I in fact think maybe we'll see a 10 beat a, what would it be, a 7 at some point, or something along those lines. But the whole system, and we've debated this back and forth, is kind of cockamamie to me, that you're 1, 2, 3, 4, and your reward is you do get a bye, but you don't get all that largesse of hosting a playoff game, all the residual income of hosting a playoff game. 5, 6, 7, and 8 get that residual largesse. That makes no sense, although it's all going to go into a pool, I presume, and be distributed out in some equitable fashion. But that's the first thing that just seems weird to me, is that 1, 2, 3, and 4 don't get to host a playoff game. And the other thing is, just as we've beat this to a death, is just the demands on the student athletes are ridiculous, going all the way to the end of January now for 2 teams. And that the amount of money they're going to raise is ridiculous. And, are they going to share it with the student athletes who make it? And I think that where we're headed with NIL and paying players and everything, it's going to kind of be Title IX be damned. I think it's going to be non-revenue sports are going to be, going to be cut back, because they're going to have to spend all this money that they're spending on rowing and whatever to pay the quarterback directly and pay the whoever, who bring in the cash. So maybe that's 5 or 10 years down the line, and that's kind of big picture. But I don't know. I see a lot of cockamamie-ness to where we're headed here.
The idea.
I still think you get to a point where you have a split of Division 1A, and you have that the super halves and the only sort of halves, and the people that, there's been talk for a long time about getting to 2 super conferences, 3 super conferences, and there's a lot more dollars thrown around there, and that's what you're going to have to do. But you're right, Steve, that how do you have an athletic department that has 36 Division I sports, and how are you going to be able to sustain all of that? And I understand that NIL operates outside of athletic budgets, but who knows what it's going to look like in a year or 2 years or 5 years or whatever. So it's a real mess. And it's, if I had a child that was stellar at an Olympic sport at this point, I would be a little concerned about what the future of collegiate amateurism is going to look like for my child who is playing, an Olympic sport. And that's just a nice way of saying a non-revenue sport, a sport that has to get supported by football and men's basketball to a certain extent at a lot of institutions.
The Ohio State can't spend money on keeping up with NIL football because they've got to keep the pistols clean. They've got to get new rifles for the rifle team. They got to make sure the track in one of their 17 stadiums is pristine, which is, that's part of the college experience. But I want to get back to what Steve was saying about how people are talking about expanding the playoffs is going to just cause more blowouts like this. This is the first time you've had both semifinals where neither was decided. Where every semifinal prior to this year, there's been at least one game decided by, or at least there's been a game decided by 17 points or more in every single semifinal series other than this one. This is the first time you've had 2 games decided by a score. Only 3 championship games have been decided by less than 15 points. So it's like there's already blowouts in all of this. What are we talking about? You're going to have more closer games with expanded playoffs because you're going to have more games. And so you're going to have better games. You're going to have more and interesting games. And the existing, why don't we just say, why isn't the existing 14 playoff the cause of all of these blowouts? Because there's just as much logic to say this is going to cause it as this is going to cause it. And what we do know is there's tons of blowouts in the existing 4 game. So if you had more teams and you had more like teams, because In a 4-game setting, how many times has there been, you know what, so this is probably just 2 teams that are worthy of being in this playoff? And so then the 3 and the 4 team are going to get blown out. Now, the 3 and the 4 team can go ahead and beat a 6 or a 9 or whatever and make it close. So there's going to be better games. And I think you weed out some of these teams. And now I think that's how you get the 4 best teams, is by weeding them out. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to be qualified to play the number 1 or number 2 team. That's just a year by year basis on whether that's going to happen. I think the blowouts in the final, in the semis, in the championship game may or may not increase or decrease. I don't think expanding the playoffs is going to have anything to do with that.
The last 4 championship games prior to this one were decided by an average of 22 points. And yes, Ohio State getting whacked by Alabama in 2020 had something to do with that. And then Georgia's like, I see your 22-point average, and just blows that up with its 58-point win. So, I mean, it's certainly the championship games have not been great here as of late in terms of being competitive games. But strangely enough, lower-ranked teams have done better than higher-ranked teams in championship games through the history of the college football playoff. If you go in and you look at those series, when it's 3 versus 1, generally 3 has done better than 1. But once again, this was a year to end a lot of trends or to just make trends worse.
Yeah, to extend on Tony's point, we're going to have more football games. Therefore, we're going to have more variety of every type of football game. Good games, great games, lousy games, horrible games. I think what we saw on Monday night is going to be knocked out of the way in the first round. And the second round, I think your likelihood for blowouts are going to be the 5-12 game, because you're going to have a group of 5 at 12, and you could have a really good team at number 5. It could be a second place team in the Big Ten or the SEC, or it's going to be a champion. Is that they're locked in the first 5, correct? I believe the champions definitely in the first 4. But anyway, and then most likely when you've got this monster like a Georgia, or you've got 2 of them, then them moving on to the second round and taking care of seeds, the next round of seeds in that second round, that's where most likely your blowouts are going to be, I would think. Okay, we've got a super chat coming in here. Wolf58, thank you so much for that. With all the media hype around Jim Knowles becoming the new defensive coordinator, don't you think it was impossible for the defense to live up to expectations?
It depends on what your expectations were. If you were expecting this team to turn around and become the 1 year of Jeff Hafley and become like the number 1 defense, you had to sit there and realize you didn't have Jeffrey Okudah. You didn't have some of those bodies there. Chase Young, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Ohio State had
Jordan Fuller.
Had 6 corners this year, and probably at very few points had more than 4 healthy. And I think that if you had realistic expectations, there's still room to be disappointed with how they gave up the big plays, especially down the stretch. There's reason to be very disappointed in some things, but I think it was damn near impossible, because people sat there and looked at the Jeff Hafley year and said, well, this is what it's going to be. Ohio State's paying this cat $2 million a year, 1.9. So therefore, this should get fixed regardless of who's there, because Jim Knowles is this defensive savior. But it took Jim Knowles a couple years to turn around Oklahoma State. Jim Knowles was doing this with the same pieces on the chessboard, save one, bringing in Tanner McAllister. That was really the only different chess piece that he had to work with here at this point. So that is not me defending Jim Knowles. That's not me going back and having revisionist history and saying, oh, guys, the defense wasn't as bad as it feels. No, it was pretty bad at times. But I think that the expectations that it was suddenly going to be righted to the point of being a top 10 national defense in every statistical category and executing 99.7% of the time, I think that's a little unrealistic.
And it was a top 10 defense for the first 11 games. And then the badness happened. But in almost every single metric, the defense is considerably better this year than it was last year. The only difference, the only way it's been worse is the big plays. I think last year Ohio State gave up 9 plays of 50 yards. This year they gave up 18, and that's the bulk of the disasters. And this defense still gave up fewer yards per play than last year's defense. I think they were number 16 in total defense. They give up fewer points per game this year than last year. So like every metric except for pass efficiency and big plays, this defense is much better than it was last year. And so, yeah, but I think what you didn't expect is for what happened in the last 2 games with the big plays. Everything else, I think the defense lived up to realistic hype. But then John Wilkes Booth shows up and then just ruins everything at the end.
The metrics to me are skewed a little bit by the teams that they play. I can't think of a season where they played so many feeble offenses as they did this year. I mean, week after week after week. I mean, Rutgers beget Northwestern, beget Indiana, beget, one after Iowa, for God's sake. Couldn't even get a first down. I mean, Notre Dame was so awful in the second half. I mean, it was like they were in the freaking fetal position in the second half of that game. 1-2-3 kick, 1-2-3 kick. The numbers were a function of the terrible offenses that they played, other than Toledo and maybe Penn State. And you said the last 2 games, Tony, it's the last 3 games. They gave up big plays against Maryland too, and that was the clarion call that something is definitely wrong here. And Michigan, which isn't even known as a big play team, had 5 of them against them. I guess, to me, I've watched football my entire life. I'm 54 years old, and I'm old enough to remember that the Browns played the prevent defense and always found a way to prevent themselves from winning games by playing the prevent defense. I would have liked to have seen the prevent defense for Ohio State. I harp on that play against Michigan. I mean, you've got them backed up in their own end. It's 3rd and 9. Play underneath. Let them catch it for 6 yards. Have them punt the football. I mean, this is the Ohio State-Michigan game. This is how this game's been played, for time in memoriam. This is how this game's played, like this. And instead, you tried to force the issue with Michigan, and you got burned. And then Georgia, he puts Lathan Ransom on an island for some reason. Boy, he showed how great he was on an island against Michigan, didn't he? With getting beat and getting beat and getting beat, and he got beat again. And an 11-point lead goes down, after the 2-point conversion to 3, and the entire momentum inside the building has shifted 180 degrees from Ohio State to Georgia, and it was just a matter of time at that point. So that you were going to lose that game, and obviously, not having Marvin Harrison in the fourth quarter, was huge. But the guys like the wizard behind the curtain or whatever. I call him Admiral Kilbride from NCIS Los Angeles because he bears a striking resemblance to Gerald McRaney. But you're gonna have to show me, bro. You can't lose games like this. He can go through some 10-minute diatribe about, I do it again. I just needed to teach him better. Bullshit. I'm not buying that. That's not sound defense. That's not sound football. It's just not. I've been watching football my entire life. That's just not sound football. I mean, had they taken that lead from 11 down to 3 and it took them 6 minutes to do it, no problem. But they did it mid early the fourth quarter. It was obvious where everything was headed. I mean, if they'd done that with 3 minutes to go in the game and then you only needed 1 or 2 first downs to salt the thing away, I could have lived with that, but not the way it turned out.
But at times that, go for broke, and I know you can change course midstream, so I'm going to get that out there right now. But if doing X, Y, and Z is what gets you in the position to win the game, and then doing X, Y, and Z is what ultimately loses you the game, you have to look at the merits of X, Y, and Z. I think, though, that X, Y, and Z can get you to a certain point, and then maybe A, B, and C need to be instituted as you're trying to hold on for dear life. And you don't necessarily want the ball to play you. You want to play the ball. I don't know. I finally ripped off the Band-Aid and watched the first half of the game with a critical eye last night. And the two series where Ohio State ended up having to punt the ball, there was a Marvin Harrison drop that would have led probably to a first down. It was in his hands. He just wasn't able to pull it off. And then on the next series, Ohio State had a 4th and goal. Or 4th and 1. Probably 4th and a half. And they ended up calling a timeout. They took it all the way to a timeout. Had Stroud lined up in the shotgun because we know they're not going to put him under center for whatever reason. And then they come back, and then they have an illegal shift because Mitch Rossi was in motion and ended up making it 4th and 6, and they ended up having to punt the ball. And I'm not necessarily saying that Ohio State was guaranteed scoring points on either of those series, but the way Ohio State was moving the ball, Ohio State certainly probably could have gotten at least 3 points out of one series or the other series. And in a game that you lose by 1, that's certainly critical. And it's very easy with the gift of hindsight to go back and look at some of these things. But, there have been a lot of people who've been very critical of Noah Ruggles missing the kick. There were a multitude of plays that put Ohio State into that position. And, this is the first opportunity I've had to kind of go back and as it must be 12 o'clock in central Ohio as the sirens are going off, going back and watching some of these missed opportunities that Ohio State had. And I say all of that while still saying credit to Georgia. Georgia played a tremendous quarter of football in the fourth quarter. When the chips were down, Stetson Bennett, who I've been very critical of through the years, I'm just being honest, I've been very critical of him, impressed the hell out of me, and was able to lead the Bulldogs past the Buckeyes, even though Lathan Ransom falls down, even though they didn't necessarily seem to have a great plan on the 2-point conversion try, even though this, even though that.
I will also say, I definitely think this defense is better than last year's defense because, Steve, they play bad offenses every year in the Big Ten. So I don't know that the bad offenses this year were so much worse than they were last year, but they were bad this year. But also, looking back since like 2009, because that's as far as CFBstats.com goes back, but the 2018 game against Maryland, Ohio State gave up 8.6 yards per play. That's the worst that they've done in the last 13 years. Against Michigan, it was 8.8 yards per play. Against Georgia, it was 8.9 yards per play. Like the last two games have been the worst yards per play games defensively, and probably since the 80s when Bo Pelini and Jim Peel were running around in the secondary for Ohio State. Just basing
Marcus
Marcus
Hartman said it's the worst in OSU history.
Yeah.
It's those two games are the 1 and 2 on that list.
And it's not a surprise when you see it's unacceptable, obviously, and you saw you lost 2 games because of it. So you learn from it and you move on, and you try to find better talent to put in those situations, I guess, is what they may try to do.
I always thought that Maryland performance was the worst. Maybe it just hit me as the worst because it was number 1, Maryland. Number 2, it was mostly on the ground for 300 yards, 350 on the ground. And it just seemed as nobody was on the TV screen most of the time during very simple running plays.
What's funny, one of my best friends is a high school coach. He's been coaching high school for 30 years, and he hears things from the Ohio State coaches and players about run fits. And he says that makes no sense to him. He said run fits is something they teach you on the first day of football in the 3rd or 4th grade, that you have this gap, you have this gap, you have this gap, and you have this gap, and never the twain shall we meet, type thing. It's like it's established from day one what everybody's responsibility is. And yet we've seen games where nobody has had certain gaps and plays leak out for 1 billion yards, and they come back and say, well, the run fits weren't there. And I know it's hard this day with the stretch or the spread offenses, trying to cover all the receivers in space and all the different routes and everything that the RPOs and everything else that go into modern football put so much pressure on the defense, and, may explain why, some of the explosion that we've seen. But, again, it comes back to fundamentally sound defense and what's sound football, and they just don't seem to play it. I don't know. It just, this is a friend of mine who's been around football intimately for his entire life. And he says, when he hears the word, he says, the concept of run fits has never been discussed in his presence in the entire time he's done this. He said, this is something that Pee Wee teams learn the first day, and then they move on to higher concepts. It's like Bob Knight chiding the sports writers, saying, we all learned how to write in the first or second grade, and then we moved on to higher concepts. You people, that type thing. It's just, it boggles the mind that something so basic, a team playing for a national championship hasn't mastered it.
David Greenshield, thank you so much for the Super Chat contribution. Yes, chances whoever doesn't get the quarterback job, Kyle McCord, Devin Brown. Transfers. All right.
I think, and again, I don't like talking about transfers, but quarterbacks are kind of a different animal. And you can go ahead and do the math. If a younger guy overtakes an older guy as a quarterback, then you can do your own math on that as to what generally happens. But I don't see, if Kyle McCord wins the job, which that's my pick right now, I don't see that meaning Devin Brown is gone. I mean, you could see Kyle McCord be a 1-year starter and leave for the NFL, and then they can certainly tell Devin Brown that is the plan. And then you're just gonna sit for one more year, and then you'll start as a redshirt sophomore like Kyle McCord has, and you can leave yourself after 1 year of starting if you want, or you can stay and be a starter for 2 years. So I don't think Kyle McCord winning the job means Devin Brown is gone.
There are 2 years of separation between them because Brown redshirted this year and McCord is not redshirted yet. So McCord will be a junior. He has 2 years of eligibility left because he had to play. There was nobody else to play last year. And so there is that separation.
All right. We appreciate everybody checking us out again this Wednesday for another Buckeyes Live, our number 195 edition. Megan, I'm back next Wednesday. We're most likely here at 11 a.m. Eastern time, but that's why it's important to subscribe and hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live. Tony with Buckeye Weekly, Buckeye Huddle, College Football Playbook. Let us know what you got going this week.
Yeah, we'll be recording a new episode of Buckeye Weekly tomorrow talking about the offensive line departures and returnees and anybody else that has come back, like Tanner McAllister leaving, which was not unexpected being he was a graduate and a fifth-year guy. Find me at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Also check out YouTube.com/@CFB Playbook. It's a new channel we're working on there at Buckeye Huddle and going to be looking more at the national scene, national scope of college football.
Kevin, what do you have on the docket?
Just released a Big Me kickoff yesterday where we talked about what it was that we watched on Monday night in the game. A lot of interesting conversations, some trolling coming in as well, but it was a fun-spirited show, an hour and 45 that you can catch up on over at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. Just kind of keeping an eye on roster movement this week. That's kind of where we're at. Who's coming back, who's on their way out. So a lot of stuff there. I probably will come back on the air this week with another Big Me kickoff to be determined.
We appreciate Steve posting these Buckeye Live shows on 247sportsbucknuts.com. Steve, what's going on this week?
Just continuing to press on as always. Have some really good interviews that we conducted at the Peach Bowl with some guys who are coming back to kind of share their viewpoint of where things are at. And, I know the world is moving awfully fast, but, there are some things. I posted one on Xavier Johnson yesterday that was just really, I thought, fabulous, some things he said. And, just trying to get things cleaned up. And January is kind of a maintenance month. And February, is heavy basketball, and then we start spring football early March. So it'll be here before we know it. Less than 2 months to the start of spring football, I'm sure. And my guess is Coach Mick will get his hands on these guys beginning on Monday. They usually give them 1 week of classes to get acclimated, and then it's heavy duty 6, 7, 5 a.m. stuff for these kids. And away they go. They lead a difficult life, that's for sure. But I think for them it's very rewarding, and it's going to be a fun year in 2023. I think any year you go into with a new quarterback, you start a new adventure. Fields was obviously beyond anything anybody could have ever hoped for. Stroud pretty much the same, and we'll see if it's McCord or Brown and where things are going.
For Steve, for Tony, for Kevin, make it on back everyone next week for Buckeyes Live, and we will see you then.